It is with great pleasure and honor that I welcome Sir Martin Sorrell, Executive Chairman, S4 Capital. Sir Martin, thank you for your time and for joining us today.
Thanks, Ranjana.
So Martin, has COVID-19 been a time of profound change for you personally? How are you managing people within and across your companies at this time?
Well, it's been a profound change for everybody. I mean, obviously talking to an Indian audience, and even at this time, a year, more than a year into this, a year and a quarter or a year and a half into this, it's still having a profound effect, particularly in countries such as India. We're seeing still a very significant effect in South America and parts of Asia Pacific beyond India, in Tokyo and in Japan. Obviously, it's impacting the Olympics, if that happens or not, at which scale it happens. So to say it doesn't have a profound effect would be an extremely bad thing to say. It clearly has had a major effect from way of life, personally, professionally, family-wise, etc. Having said that, from a business point of view, given the fact that S4 is a purely digital operation, not just digital first, digital through and through, it clearly is a situation and an age which has stimulated, it's accelerated digital adoption and transformation at three levels. At consumer level, because consumers are educating their kids online, they're taking financial services online, in-homes games and entertainment, ordering essentials and groceries. In America, 30% of the population ordered essentials and groceries for the first time online. So it's obviously impacted consumers. It's impacted the media, as you know. So all the trends that we saw happening around streamers as opposed to free-to-air TV, about accelerating the declines of radio, of TV and free-to-air TV and newspapers and magazines, all that has been accelerated. The demise of traditional billboard and the rise of digital billboard has stimulated, obviously, that trend too. So obviously with media. And then finally, enterprise companies have accelerated their digital transformation, because in Q2, particularly of last year, blew a hole in their P&Ls and their balance sheets, and they decided to accelerate their digital transformation. So it's had a very profound effect on consumers, on media, and on enterprise. I don't think it's created necessarily new stuff. It's accelerated old stuff. So, and also the way we live and the way that we work. I mean, more working from home, obviously that will continue. There'll be a hybrid model. In our own case, probably 3 days a week in the office and 2 days out. More varied working patterns, commuting patterns, living patterns. Some people in America, for example, will move to lower tax states and less dense cities and towns. And you've already seen shift from California to Texas, to Florida, to Colorado. So, and that may actually reduce or change patterns of salaries and payments. So you have seen very significant shifts and changes. From a personal point of view, there's been much less traveling, and it'll probably mean that my traveling pattern will change over time as well. There'll probably be fewer trips and longer duration, certainly after. I mean, at the moment, if you want to travel internationally, it's very difficult. Within America, I went recently, it's remarkable how quickly that has snapped back, and how the airlines domestically are probably running at about 90% of previous capacity, putting in new routes, whereas internationally, of course, it's pretty empty, and of course quite difficult because of vaccination and continuous re-examination and retesting. So, but quite rightly so in these very difficult environments. So very profound effects and changes. And I think these changes, if they're not permanent, they will be much longer term than people think. So the impact on cities, the impact on people, on working patterns, living patterns, well, I think will be much more significant than people people know.
Yeah, you've mentioned also that S4 is digitally through and through, right? So this brings us to the point of, you require creativity in such an environment. And this brings us again to remote working. So do you think that remote working, is conducive to creativity? This requires a high level of collaboration, and especially in high touch environments, how do we get teams to kind of remain creative while working remote?
Well, there's a lot of discussion about that. There's a lot of debate about whether proximity, you see, for example, in the investment banking world, which many people may think is not creative, but is pretty creative, actually. David Solomon of Goldman Sachs is saying people have to be back in the office by June. I mean, there are differences of view. My own view, I'm 76. And I should be. There's a bit about this control phenomenon here that if you have people in the office, you can see what they're doing, and if they're not in the office, they're not doing what you want them to do, and productivity is low. I don't think that's the case. I mean, we can measure productivity quite effectively through technology, and I don't think our productivity has changed dramatically since COVID kicked in a year or so ago. In fact, I think it's pretty much stayed the same. And what we lose through people being at home, and obviously work-life balance alters, we gain because of lack of commuting time. So I think there is a worthwhile debate, but a bit of it is about control. That in the old approach and old system, if you had people sitting in the office, and you can see what they're doing, that in some way you have greater control over them. And I think that's a phenomenon of my generation rather than millennial generations or Gen Z or whatever you want to call it. Having said that, I think that the hybrid model is more likely to gain traction, particularly in the short to medium term. That's what we will be doing. Maybe in the longer term when people become more relaxed, but high office buildings with lots of elevators are going to be at a disadvantage. I mean, it's going to be quite difficult particularly, COVID is going to be with us for a number of years, and we're going to have to be taking measures, whether it's testing and tracing or whatever it happens to be. Vaccinations will be improved over time, even more so than they have. I mean, it's quite remarkable what the healthcare industry has done in a very short period of time in various parts of the world. But no, I think on balance, our approach will change, but there will be others who take a different approach. Cities will ebb and flow. Some cities like San Francisco will be badly affected. We've already seen that. Some other cities, such as maybe Boston with biotech and healthcare at its center, will be aided. We've certainly seen California suffer, and maybe not LA, but certainly San Francisco and Florida pick up and Texas pick up. So there will be varied patterns as a result.
Right. Recently, it's a very interesting thing. Eric Yuan, CEO from Zoom, said that he had suffered from something called Zoom fatigue after having had to take up more than 19 Zoom calls in a day. So have you had a similar experience, especially during the start of COVID? Do you long for those good old days where you are able to catch up over a cup of coffee or probably your favorite drink?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it is extremely efficient, and I can understand the Zoom fatigue. I mean, today we've been on an investment conference, and it's been, every 40 minutes with about a 10-minute, well, not even a 10-minute gap, because you always overlap and you go into the time. So it's been pretty fatiguing, and I'm sure by the end of the day I will have had enough. But having said that, it is quite efficient, and it is amazing what you can do through the technology. And going back to your question about creativity, there are ways that you can stimulate creativity. I mean, we saw in the early days of the pandemic in April of last year a switch to robotics, to robotic production, to animation, to switching live events to online events. We saw that in our content business, which is 70% of our revenues, pivoted very rapidly to that, and very efficiently and very effectively. So there are ways of using technology, and technology will continuously improve. It's not static. So Zoom technology or the Microsoft and Google technologies will all develop, Facebook technologies will all develop over time into much more sophisticated ways. And you know, when we got into, we have our daily meeting of our top 8 people, and I remember we were discussing in May of last year, we were a little bit worried about whether Zoom reduces, or technologies like that reduces, sort of creativity or creative differences. And we found ways, you know, for example, there's an article in the New York Times about one of our people using Epic's Fortnite games, an avatar in the games to meet a client. So a client had the avatar, and one of our people had it, and they met through the game. So there are plenty of ways of using technology in highly creative ways, particularly as that technology develops and becomes more sophisticated. So I, you know, all is not lost. I mean, obviously human contact, exchange, involvement is critically important, and it is important. And for example, we are thinking about redesigning, we're not thinking about, we are redesigning our office space, areas where colleagues can meet, areas where colleagues can work, and areas where they can meet clients. So all different.
Right. And very interesting. I mean, technology and what you are probably also doing is crazy. Also, just a very another fact is in his 1997 essay, Michael Goldhaber in Wired predicts online influencers. So, and perhaps we see this today as a shorthand for advertising, you know, where everyone's trying to get your attention. Do you think that this is sustainable in the long run? Should big tech be winding down some of the techniques they're using to get people hooked? Overall, like, is this healthy? Is this sustainable?
Well, you're using the word hooked, implying it's some form of drug, which is a little bit of a loaded way of putting it. You mentioned influencers. Influencers to me is a subset of the content industry. You know, we have an influencer company, IMA, that we brought into Media Monks and has become an integrated part of our content practice, and indeed S4 as a whole. So we continue to develop that. You know, tech comes in for a lot of slagging off, and I think unfairly so, because those platforms, Google, Facebook, Amazon, for example, Tencent, Alibaba, TikTok, are the engines of growth for small and medium-sized businesses, and those businesses provide a lot of the jobs which are critically important, particularly during a pandemic or as a result of a pandemic. So really getting to grips with it, with the technology. I mean, Jack Ma always said Alibaba was the engine, or continues to say, is the engine of growth for the Chinese entrepreneur, whether it be in China or ultimately as it expanded or tried to expand around the world. And Google, Facebook, and Amazon probably depend for about 60% of their revenues. We get a number from Facebook on the number of business customers they have or advertisers they have, but we don't really know the percentage of revenue. And I think one of the reasons they don't give that number is that we would all be surprised by the significance that small businesses have in terms of the development of those platforms and vice versa. So, you know, when you talk about, it's somewhat emotive to talk about people being hooked by it. Obviously, there are issues around privacy. There are issues around brand safety. There are issues around interference in elections. But I think the platforms have made, some would say not strenuous efforts, but I think strenuous efforts. I mean, Facebook has hired at least 30,000 people to monitor editorial content. So I think they have gone a long way to trying to deal with it. Google's decision on third-party cookies, Apple's decision on IDFA are all examples of making decisions around these areas in advance. I mean, I'm sure that Google, not sure, I believe that Google made that decision about third-party cookies because they feared regulatory involvement. They saw what was happening in Australia. They're worried about what might happen in France and other parts of the world.
Right. You mentioned, editorial content. So I just want to jump into that because I have a special question for you. So one interesting fact that you actually mentioned in one of your interviews a year or two back was that a trend where today tech companies are actively hiring for editorial roles. So this, in a sense, gives us the view that, brands or tech companies or tech firms are very, very aware of how they represent themselves online. So what are your predictions for those who aim to grow in the digital space? What direction are we who are gunning for digital? What is the future for us?
Well, I mean, if you look at digital, I mean, there are three markets. The total addressable market for S4 is about $1.8 trillion, about 550 billion in media, about 500 billion in marketing services, and about 700 billion in trade budgets. And we look at that 1.7, 1.8 trillion, about 50% of the media piece of it is already digital. It's forecast to be 70% by 2026. It's growing currently by about, well, this year probably will grow by about 20%, whereas traditional will probably grow by about 7, maybe 8. We'll see how it pans out. The growth figures in April in the US are very strong for the industry as a whole, with digital up 83%, and I think traditional up 17, and the market up 53. So we're talking about huge growth rates in April. And we're seeing that in our own business. We saw an acceleration of what our organic growth rate was about 33% in Q1, having been, when you went through the 4 quarters of last year, it was 19, plus 19, plus 3. This is all organic, plus 23, plus 27, plus 33. And my view is it will accelerate in Q2 of this year. And this year we've upped our guidance to 30% from 25% before. So digital growth is going to continue at significant rates. You look at Google, it looks like you extrapolate their Q1 for the year, 180 billion to 240 billion in terms of revenues. Facebook 80 to 110, Amazon 20 to 35. That's 100 billion plus of new revenues in digital. Some of it comes from traditional media. Some of it is increase in primary demand for digital. Some of it comes from the smaller companies, as I mentioned before. So you've got, lots of sources. So some of it is primary demand, and some of it is secondary demand and pulling money from traditional. But the outlook is very strong. We have two growth drivers, tailwinds. First, the secular growth of digital transformation. As I said, it's 50% of media now. It will be 70% by 2026. So there's secular growth there, irrespective of what's happening in economic conditions. And then this year and next year, with the rebound from the pandemic, obviously in India, it's probably going to be slower given what's happened with the pandemic recently. But there will be a rebound there as well. And worldwide, we're seeing global growth rates of 5 to 6 this year and 4 to 5 next year. So strong growth rates as a result.
Mm-hmm. Yes, my company, the company that I represent, Eventible, is actually a review platform for B2B events, more like, say, a TripAdvisor, but more B2B event focused. We're in an age where likes and dislikes are published almost immediately after going through an experience. So do you personally look at reviews online before making a purchase? Or, was it just simpler to go by recommendation? What do you think? What is your opinion?
Well, I think it was David Ogilvy who used to say that the most powerful, or one of the most powerful ways is word of mouth. Or certainly if it wasn't David Ogilvy, many people said word of mouth is the most powerful. And of course, that is the reason why influencers, the reason why recommendations, whether they're online or word of mouth, are so powerful. So reviews are just online word of mouth. And if somebody gives you a point of view, somebody whose view you value and you think is a good view or an important view, you will follow that advice. And I think word of mouth, I mean, all we're talking about is a modification on a very old line, which is word of mouth advertising. So the answer is it is very powerful. it's dangerous to abuse it. I mean, as you've seen in India, there have been cases of influencers being paid to influence, and the product or the service not living up to the promise, and there's been a bounce back, and quite rightly repercussions. But having said all that, no, I think it's obviously an important area. It's not a sole area, but it's an important area, and I do read reviews and I do listen to what other people say about products and services. I'm influenced just like anybody else.
Right. You've accomplished so much in your life. What is the long game for you? Number one. Number two, what advice would you give to, say, a Sir Martin Sorrell in his 20s, looking back?
So what was the first question again? I mean, the advice is to learn Chinese, and to learn code. So those will be the two things. So geographically, China and India are going to be the growth economies. So that's one thing. So that's the geographical bucket. S4 is 70% the Americas, 20% EMEA, and 10% Asia Pacific. And our objective is 40-20-40 because of the importance of the Indian and Chinese economies. China will be the biggest economy in the world by 28, I think it is, not by per capita basis, but overall. And of course, India will be the most populous country, and India's GDP will continue to grow quickly once, of course, we're out of this pandemic situation. So I'm very bullish. I'm a raging bull on India, and I must say on China too, particularly in an Asia Pacific context. So that's one thing. The other thing, of course, is code, which is another language, but it's a language for tech, and it's to indicate that the important areas are to learn languages in countries where growth is important, and of course to learn languages where growth is important per se, which will be tech. What was the first part of the question?
No, I just said that you've accomplished so much. So what is the long game for you now? Like, what do you look forward to?
I think with S4, the mission is to create a new advertising and marketing services model, because the old model is past its sell-by date. It was created, people think it was created in the 1980s and 90s. It was created in the 1950s by Marion Harper, IPG. It's been there for 70 years. McKinsey says the average company lasts about 17 years in the S&P 500 or FTSE 100. So it's past its sell-by date. A new model is needed. So the game, or I think you use the word game, the objective is to build a new advertising and marketing service model and disrupt the old. So we're like a grand example, like Tesla, like Amazon. We're trying to disrupt an industry in a significant way.
What is the one campaign across platforms that's at the top of your mind right now, or your personal favorite?
I never answer that question, because
you never do.
No, because it's just invidious to pick out. I would pick out one of our campaigns, and people would say he would do, wouldn't he? Pick out somebody else, and now people would say, "Why did you do that?" Or one client would object. The one I found funniest was a Berlitz. One of our agencies at WPP up in the Nordics did a language teaching ad, which was hysterically funny. It's about it's a couple of German Coast Guards. It's a German Coast Guard whose English was a little bit ropey. It's on YouTube, actually. I think it's Berlitz. I think it was Berlitz. Worth watching because it's quite funny, but it appealed to me. But that's the only one I've ever really quoted.
Okay. Any experiences about India you'd like to share? Your visit to India in the past?
Well, we don't mention the cricket. I've been, I haven't seen all of India. I wish I had, but I've been around a fair bit. Beyond Delhi and Mumbai, or New Delhi and Mumbai, and I love India, as you know. I love Indian food, and particularly with mango chutney, which no Indian can understand why I would a nice chicken curry with mango chutney is something I adore. And Ranjana Kapoor used to be, and his wife Jimmy used to entertain me with a very good curry, and I always enjoyed that. Always enjoyed it too much, and always put on a lot of weight when I was in there. And also loved to play cricket there. I mean, Ranjana arranged for us to have it was at the University of Mumbai, Bombay University, and I think Venkat had a ground there, which ELF, if I remember rightly, ELF sponsored it, and it was roped off from it was boarded off from where you get killed, on those grounds that were next to one another. So it was boarded off, and that it was a nice ground, and we had I think it was WPP versus Ogilvy, and they let me bat, and they got me out but let me stay in. They tried to humor me by very early in the morning. We started very early in the morning, and we finished. I think we played for about 3 or 4 hours, and it was great fun. And it's always great fun there. But the trouble is, the Indians are too good at cricket for us. They're too good.
That's a very sweet compliment. Thank you. So any just one last question, any recreational activities? I'm sure cricket has, you give so many.
Well, I'm gonna play in a couple of weeks. I have my annual 2 games, but they're actually colliding on the same date. So I usually play in a pro-am, not very well, but I totter around the field for a bit. But we're going to have a celebratory WPP cricket match in June. So I'm looking forward to that. So that's the extent of my activities. And so I do a bit of skiing, still manage to get onto a pair of skis occasionally. But that's about it. And I go to the gym. You
go to the gym. Well,
Twice a week.
Right. Twice a week. That's nice.
Only twice a week. I wish it was more than that. It should be 3 times a week.
Yeah. But thank you, Sir Martin, for the wonderful
Pleasure.
Insights. And it was an absolute amazing experience to meet you and also chat with you.
Thank you. You're so good, Ranjana. You should be in the advertising business.
Oh, that's thank you. I'm humbled.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
God bless. Bye.
Bye.